Get it all?
I think you did. Thank you.
Yeah, finding time has got to be difficult.
Yep, it's definitely difficult, but I'm always happy to make time to help veterans be successful.
My man, I appreciate it. So thanks for coming in. So I'll get you started. So what was the biggest challenge you faced when leaving, the active to go into the civilian side of the tech field?
Yeah, I think as far as transitions from active to tech, one of the big things is just the change in the culture that you have to deal with. So in the government, you're dealing with very hierarchical culture where you have a lot of very rigorous command chains. And when you move to a startup, it's not like that at all. Startup is very flat organization. You have a lot of crosstalk between different silos within that organization. Marketing is talking to engineering, is talking to sales. And so just keeping up with that pace and flexibility and change of how things work from an organizational perspective is definitely something that's unique. And another thing is just making sure that you have the right certifications and things in place so that you can be successful. So something that's really big in the cybersecurity space is going to be certifications. They're kind of like they're not something that's going to get you a job, but they will get you in the door for a job. So they will get you the ability to start out and make it through an initial hiring process. And then once you have that cert, you have to do well on the interview and you have to sort of prove your technical knowledge or whatever knowledge that you're trying to demonstrate.
So I mean, how important are those certs compared to hands-on experience or degree in the cyber market?
Yeah, I can definitely speak to that. So I got my CISP while I actually working at this startup that I started called ValiCyber. And I used a really cool program called Onward to Opportunity. This is something I recommend everyone take a look at. It's done by Syracuse University. So Onward to Opportunity is a program where Syracuse basically puts you through a training program to get a certification. They have a bunch of different certs that are available, I think like 20 or 30. And the deal is if you go through this training that they put you through, they will pay for your test. And so this can be really, really beneficial because generally these tests can be hundreds of dollars. I think the CISP was like $750 and I had that test 100% paid for. I didn't have to worry about it. So Onwards to Opportunity is great. I think that when you're thinking about certifications in cybersecurity, you don't want to be the person who has a LinkedIn with like 100 different certs that are all these little acronyms listed. It's not really what you want. You want to align your certifications with where you want to go with your career. Ideally, your certifications are something that are related to a topic you're working on currently. That way, you'll actually get value out of the certifications and you'll build knowledge from them. You don't just want certifications for certification's sake, because what ends up happening for people that do this is they don't actually develop much depth in that field. And then when they get asked basic questions in an interview in that topic, they don't really perform that well. So definitely try to align it to something that you're doing or somewhere you want to go with your career so that you're actually practicing what you learn as you go through the certification process.
So avoid that jack of all trades, master of none look.
Yes, I think that's definitely important when it comes to certifications.
So I mean, for somebody without the technical background, I mean, is the cyber world an option, or where should they plug in if this is all new to them?
Yeah, so I got my start in the cybersecurity space at the Air Force Academy. I was a member of the Academy's competitive hacking team. And while I was there, the hacking team does something called CTF competitions or capture the flag competitions. And these are essentially sort of Jeopardy style competitions where you can have different categories of problems across different areas of cybersecurity. Maybe it's cybersecurity for websites or cryptography or something like that. And of course, there's different difficulties because it's Jeopardy style. And so the idea of the CTF is you're supposed to find something called a flag, which is a random string of characters that you can submit for points for your team. And I think initially doing something like this might be a little bit intimidating, especially if you're not someone who has a technical background. But I do think having some technical experience wherever you end up going in cyber is valuable. There are non-technical roles in cyber too, which I can speak to. But when it comes to CTFs, there are sort of basic level CTFs that are geared more towards high schoolers, which I think are a very nice, attractive way to get into it. One of them is called Pico CTF, that's run by Carnegie Mellon. And I think they keep those challenges on the internet all the time. So it's a website that you can access anytime you want. The other thing to note is that CTFs are generally time boxed. So there's a start time and an end time, and it's really a competition. There's another thing called a war game, which is just a website that has different technical challenges on it that you can go do whenever you want. And the nice thing about a war game is that it has solutions for those problems that have been posted on YouTube or other sites by people who have done those challenges. And so if you just want to get some basic knowledge across some different categories in cybersecurity, I definitely recommend checking out some of the basic CTFs or some of the basic war games. And then if you get stuck on something, go to YouTube, look through different resources to learn. And once you have that technical base, it's going to make you much more effective wherever you end up going in your cybersecurity career.
What about those non-technical ones you mentioned?
Yeah, so the big one is GRC. That's going to be governance, risk, and compliance. And so when you think about technical roles, there are things like Security Operations Center, where you're doing defense and you're responding to attacks. There's red teaming, where you're trying to find holes in networks. But with governance, risk, and compliance, it's more of a corporate policy and corporate strategy role, where you're trying to think about how do we organize this group of people or this company in a way that is secure? What processes do we need to put in place? What policies do we need to put in place so that people do things in a way that is secure? It's a way to sort of motivate proper security behavior within a company or within an organization. And there are plenty of roles in the GRC space. There are certifications in the GRC space too. So it's definitely something that is worth going after. And as someone notes, yeah, GRC is governance, risk, and compliance. So that is definitely a great role to get into if you're not super technical. That said, I still recommend having a technical base, because at the end of the day, cybersecurity challenges are often technical challenges. So understanding some basics about the technology is going to help you be successful in that sort of role.
So you kind of been around the block, and you're still, doing the military thing as a reservist. So, I mean, what misconceptions do you see veterans have about tech jobs that you'd want to clear up for them? Things that, yeah, you think it's this, but it's not that, or it's not that anymore.
Yeah, I think one misconception is that if you land a tech job, you're going to make $500,000 a year right off the bat. I think there's a lot of stuff on LinkedIn and TikTok and YouTube that might make you think this way. You will generally make more money than you did in the government, but you're not going to be a bajillionaire just for breaking into tech. I think the other thing to note about technology companies is that they move very quickly, and especially startups, they change all the time. And when government organizations, when you think about the way they operate, they're very risk averse. And this isn't a bad thing, but they're just focused on following policy, making slow, steady, and deliberate progress. Startups and many technology companies are sort of the opposite. They're much more, they reward risk. And you have to change your mindset from being in the mindset of, I don't want to do anything that makes a mistake, to, I want to try to push the bounds to do things differently or better than the way they're being done right now. And I think this is something that can be really great for someone that's coming out of the military, because you have a lot of experience leading people and leading organizations and working on big programs. You have more flexibility to get things done and more power to get things done, because you don't generally have to get sign off from many people above you to get something done in a startup or in a technology company like you might have to do in the government.
Yeah. I mean, startup companies, sometimes you'd be like, I got an idea and run with it. And then get rewarded. Sometimes it's better to beg forgiveness than ask permission, in that kind of an atmosphere.
Yes, exactly.
So, I mean, with veterans coming out, how do you think that the best way to translate the military cyber IT experience into civilian language that recruiters understand and value, other than the typical acronym stuff? But there's a lot of cross-pollination there. Are there things you've seen them miss?
Yeah, that's a great point. So I think that you want to try to stay away from acronyms. Like if you went to a certain school or training for your cyber work in the Air Force, try to stay away from acronyms for that school. You will run into a lot of veterans, so a lot of people will know what you're talking about, but you're going to run into a lot of people that have no idea what you're talking about. And essentially what you want to do is translate that acronym that's on the military side to something that makes sense on the civilian side. So let's say you went to undergraduate cyber training. Kind of explain what that was. You took some basic Python courses, you did some basic red teaming courses, so on and so forth, and just sort of explain in more words what exactly you did. I think that can make your resume look a lot more powerful, and it can help people really understand what you did. Because the thing you have to recognize when you're applying for jobs is companies, we get this too. You get tons and tons of just junk resumes that you have to sort through. And there's a lot of AI and automation that's being used to sort through those now. The AI and automation doesn't recognize what you're talking about. It's just going to throw your resume out, and you don't want that to happen. So you want to make sure that you're explaining stuff in a way that makes sense to the civilian side. And the way to do that is just to use plain English, try to avoid acronyms or specific names of courses or schools.
So, I mean, you mentioned the AI, and we beat that to death, saying, hey, use ChatGTP to make those connections, to say, hey, instead of, tech school, blah, 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 it lists it out. But I mean, do you see on the cyber world, do you see AI as, like more of a threat or more of a tool? I mean, where on that scale do you see it in your seat right now?
Yeah, this is definitely a hot topic these days. I see it on both sides. I think it's definitely something where you're going to see a lot of AI generated attacks. In particular, I think phishing is going to get a lot better. The days of phishing emails from people that are speaking to you in broken English, and it's obviously a phishing email, those are going to go away. It's going to be very well written English. They're going to be very well written messages that go into your email inbox that are tricking you to click on a link or something like that. On the flip side, I think the analysis of these sorts of scams is going to get a lot better, because when you think about AI, a lot of the hype right now is around large language models, which essentially do natural language processing. And so if an attack involves some use of natural language, like a phishing attempt, then you can use LLMs to very effectively defend against those sorts of attacks. And the nice thing about LLMs too is they can be tuned to perform certain actions. This is what's called agentic AI, where you basically take an LLM and you give it some capability to make changes to systems. And you have to be careful about this because LLMs can go off the rails, but if you do put in the appropriate guardrails, which companies are rigorously working to do, you can automate a lot of the mundane things. And so I think something that can be automated quite a bit will be analysis of alerts or threats that you might see in a security operations center, because you're going to have hundreds, maybe thousands of alerts that an analyst has to go through every day. If you can automate that quite a bit, I think it's going to make a big difference.
Yeah, it's a hydra. So back to the resume thing. What do you think hiring managers really look for when reviewing, veteran resumes and veteran talent?
I think they're going to look for a lot of the same things they're looking for out of civilian candidates. I think as a veteran, you're typically going to have some strengths in that you're working on multi-million-dollar programs, you're working with teams, and so you have experience leading teams. A lot of people in their civilian careers don't have any sort of leadership experience until they get much more senior. So that's a big advantage that you have as a veteran. I think that when it comes to sort of technical capabilities or technical prowess, the skill sets you're going to be looking at will be largely the same. It's like, are you contributing to open source projects if that's the way you're trying to spin yourself? Or have you found a CVE? Have you found a vulnerability in your research and in your development? Or are there specific types of malware that you've analyzed? And it really depends on the type of role that you're going after. But I think that lean on your experience leading organizations and working with big organizations, and then try to translate what you've done into technical terms that are just generic across the industry. I think that's a good way for a veteran to approach their resume writing.
Makes sense. So back on your transition, I mean, how do you feel like the Air Force Academy and just the service in general prepared or didn't prepare you for the the tech civilian world?
Absolutely. So I think the technical training I received, because I was also very lucky to go to MIT to do my master's degree. The Air Force sent me to do that after the Air Force Academy. That was just like second to none technical training. I got the best education in the world, and that was all really because of what the Air Force allowed me to do. I was introduced to the hacking team at the Air Force Academy because it existed and it was very well run. We had an excellent coach. So I think all that technical training was fantastic. What it teaches you nothing about is how to run and how to start a business. And running and starting a business is its own unique challenge. You have a lot of different, especially with a VC-backed startup, because that's what we are. So we're a venture capital-backed startup. We deal with investors. There's a lot of relationship management. You have relationships with investors that you have to manage. You have relationships with customers you have to manage. And then you just have internal politics and internal relationships that you have to deal with within the company itself. And so that's something that I didn't have to deal with a lot in my military career. Maybe some people do, but that's not something I had a lot of experience with. And then when you're starting a company, understanding what is valuable to people is really important. Something that's a big problem for folks when they're starting companies is how do you identify what's called product market fit? Essentially, how do you know that you've built the right product that solves a problem that people care about? And the government and the military doesn't really give you any sort of training on how to do this sort of thing. This is something that you have to figure out largely on your own coming out of the military. And perhaps if you go to business school or something like that, you would have some training. But in my experience, this was something I had to figure out sort of on the way of starting this company. It wasn't something I received any special training on from my military service.
Yeah, trial by fire.
Exactly.
So, I mean, were there any hard lessons you kind of learned during that first year that you would share that wisdom so anybody here could avoid that?
Sure, absolutely. So we, ValiCyber, actually did a pivot, which is something that's pretty common for early stage startups. A pivot is one where you start out focusing on one problem and you change your focus to a different problem. And so we started off based on my time in the Air Force. I was working on security for satellites, both satellite ground systems, satellites in orbits. All these systems run a specific piece of software called Linux. And so I was doing a lot of defensive security on Linux. And as a result, I was working with a lot of commercial off-the-shelf tools that had issues. And that's what motivated me to start ValiCyber, was to fix these issues. And so we started ValiCyber. We started initially as a Linux security company. And what we found, and this is something very interesting about startups, people are excited about people that start companies. Like, it's cool to start a company. It's cool to do something innovative. And people generally want to be supportive. People are nice when you get on calls with them. You're going to say, hey, this is cool technology. This is awesome, guys. They're going to tell you all of this really wonderful stuff. But the questions they really should be asking, that you should be looking for, are what does it cost? What's the budgeting that I need to do to buy this product? Because those are buying questions. They're not just being nice or telling you how cool it is. They're actually asking the right questions because they want to make a purchase of the product. And so we went through this phase early in the development of the company where we were getting a lot of this positive feedback, but it wasn't really the feedback that led to a purchase of the product, which is ultimately what you need to be successful in a business. And so we made a pivot into a different niche in the market. Instead of focusing on Linux generally, we focused on a specific type of Linux system called a hypervisor. And this has gone very well. We've gotten those buying questions all the time now. This is something I just had to learn on the fly. It wasn't something I had any sort of special training for ahead of time.
Oof, I do not envy you that. So, I mean, what advice would you give to folks who are kind of intimidated by how fast the industry works? I mean, is there any special sauce in there? Or is it just you got to buckle down and drink from the fire hose?
I think it's just always important to have a growth mindset and recognize that failure is part of the process. So this is actually something that my military career and my career in academia didn't prepare me for much at all. You fail a ton in a startup. You fail all the time. Product doesn't work. Someone doesn't like your product. Someone doesn't like your marketing pitch. And you just got to deal with it and move on. And you have to get better from it. You got to fix the product. You got to fix the way you talk about the product so that you can pitch it more effectively in the future. And in my experience in school, I was a good student, so I was used to getting straight A's. In the military, I was good at my job, so I was used to getting a lot of positive feedback. I really had to deal with failure. And so that was something that was very new for me in the role of a startup. And I think that's something that will be new for folks transitioning out of the government. You're going to deal with failure a lot, and it's okay. It's okay to fail. You just got to make sure you grow from it and that you learn from it. And if you take that mindset and you constantly are learning and educating yourself, I actually dedicate time every day to learn something about something new that's happening in the space. I think that will help you keep pace with things, because ultimately people have to do the work. Other people are struggling just like you. So as long as you're working to better yourself, you're going to keep up with everyone else and you're not going to be left in the dust.
So, I mean, when that was happening, do you feel like mentorship played a role in that? And how do you think that these folks can find the right mentors?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I was lucky in that I had an experienced co-founder who is also my father. So the company I started is a father-son company. So he's been through the ringer on this sort of thing. He's been through a lot of his experience in the past. So working with him was very useful for me. I think he was a big mentor. Another big mentor for me was and still is, my thesis advisor from my graduate study. He is just awesome, awesome, awesome person. And he's been very influential for my career and my development, more so on the interpersonal side too, the technical side, which I thought was interesting because he was working on my master's thesis with me. You'd think it would be more of a technical collaboration, but he gave me a lot of advice just about working with people and how to be an effective leader and that sort of thing. So can you repeat the question for me one more time? I want to make sure I'm answering it well.
I mean, it's about mentorship. I mean, you obviously had a mentorship, you had to lean on a mentor, and how do you suggest folks here find the right mentor?
Yeah, exactly. So how do you find the right mentor? I think part of it is just going to be through your experience. So if you have someone that you worked with in the past, I recommend keeping that connection with that person. If you've liked working with them, if you feel like you learned from them, keep that connection open. Call them every once in a while, talk with them every once in a while, just to let them know how you're doing, get their advice on things. I think that can be a great way to find a mentor. And then there are just a lot of people out there that want to help veterans, typically other veterans. So if you see another veteran in a leadership position or a position that you're interested in, I definitely recommend just reaching out, saying, hey, you're looking for some advice in the space. And this is how you build that relationship is first you get some advice and you have a few phone calls here and there to get some advice. And eventually, you have a mentor. And I think that finding someone who is where you want to be and someone who has walked in your own shoes is going to be someone that will give you good advice. Is also something that's going to be willing to give you good advice because they've been down the same path that you've been in the past.
Yeah, you're here doing it now, so we definitely appreciate that, man. Thank you. So you mentioned your dad and you working together. Was he what inspired you to found ValiCyber? And what was the hardest part about starting that company, especially with dad?
Yeah, so he's definitely a big part of it. So I don't think I would have started the company without his urging. And obviously my experience in the Air Force was a big part of it too, just the challenges and frustration I was experiencing with the existing tools that we were trying to use to secure these Linux systems. I think that my time with the startup was really challenging finding that product market fit. I think that was definitely a big challenge. Another big challenge was understanding when to let go of things. So when you're early stage in a startup, you're responsible for everything. I mean, we started this company, it was literally like a kitchen table discussion sort of thing. And so you're starting at that level. Eventually you have to bring on team members and you have to delegate things to them. And so knowing when to let things go and when people are ready to take responsibility for things so that you can focus on things that are more important, understanding that delegation skill is definitely something that has been useful to learn. And I've learned that a lot from my father. I think he's shown me when it's right to let things go and pass things on to other people, and when it's right to make sure that you have your hands on it so that you can ensure it's a successful effort.
That's great having your dad being able to do that. But I mean, there's got to be those days where it's like dad's being dad. It's we all get that.
Sure.
So
Sure. Yeah. I've dealt with conflicts with him and with other members of the company. And I think part of that is just being an empathetic person, sort of trying to understand where they're coming from and then helping them understand where you're coming from. If you do that first, as opposed to just getting into an argument or some sort of heated discussion, I think that can help smooth things over quite a bit. And we're a remote company, so that also makes it a little bit more challenging because you don't have the face-to-face time with people. It can be easy to get a message or an email that bugs you and you're just kind of mulling over it and you're stewing on it and then it blows up later. You don't want to do that. You want to deal with issues. You want to explain how you feel and understand how other people feel. And I think that can help you deal with those sorts of areas where someone is annoying you or frustrating you in your career and in your life.
To me, that sounds like a leadership lesson, from the Air Force. Do you feel like that's part of what carried over into running your business?
I don't know if I actually learned this one from the Air Force. I think I learned this one from my wife. So my wife is a social worker and she has to deal with empathy and listening to people and all those sorts of skills that I don't think I had developed quite as well as she has. So I think learning from her has been really impactful to help me deal with these sorts of interpersonal conflicts that I've dealt with in my career.
Got it. Hey, Chuck, you got a question? Go ahead, sir.
Hi, Austin. Out of Syracuse, New York, up here. So I was wondering, as far as your startup's concerned, how did you go about looking for that venture capital, and what percentages of, or what grace periods do you have to give to people to like percentages of the company, percentage of profit, et cetera, to get those people on board?
Yeah, absolutely. So when you're raising money and it's the first time you're raising money, typically it's going to be in the form of a convertible note. So there's not actually a valuation on the company yet. The investor isn't taking anything out of the company. And once you have a more defined product and some sales, then you can actually put a valuation on the company, and that percentage of the company that they take will become solidified. I have not seen deals where an investor takes some percentage of sales. I'd say that's something to be a little bit wary of. Generally, they're going to be doing something like a convertible note where they put some money into the company that will be converted into equity later. And then if you are doing like a Series A, which is also a pretty early round, typically the dilution you might see would be 20%. So you sell off about 20% of the company and your first major round of funding, and you keep going on from there. It can vary widely though. Some companies sell more, some companies sell less. It just depends a lot on the specifics of the company, but that's a pretty good rule of thumb. Now, as far as finding VCs, there are different types of VCs. So there are institutional venture capitalists that are basically groups of venture capitalists that work together to go find good investments. And these are more sophisticated investors typically. And if they're putting money into your company, you have to go through a very rigorous due diligence process. When you're starting out and you're just getting your initial funding, you typically want to go for angel investors. And so an angel investor is going to be generally a wealthy individual or a group of wealthy individuals that are interested in putting some of their money into startups. And what you can do is look for angel investing groups. So for example, Atlanta, Georgia has the Atlanta Angels, and different cities will have angel investing groups, and states will have angel investing groups. Those are groups that I would recommend going to when you're really early starting off to get your initial funding and to get the rocket ship off the ground, so to speak.
Thanks a lot. That's really, really actually fascinating. Thanks.
Yep, you bet.
That can't be fun. So what's different about leading, engineers over airmen at the company? Because obviously it's not going to be quite as directive. You're going to have different egos and different backgrounds without that commonality that we all dealt with.
Yeah, I think a big part of it is just knowing your people. And this is something that you need to do when you're working with airmen too, is just understanding how people work, what their tics are, what their quirks are. And you'll learn quite a bit as you work with someone more closely. You'll find issues where, if I do this, they're going to get really annoyed, or if I do this, they'll be really happy. So understanding how people work is going to be really important for leading those individuals in your organization. Now, differences between leading engineers as opposed to leading airmen, I think engineers tend to be very task oriented. So they want, a defined list of things to do. It's rare that you're going to find someone, and if you do find someone like this, you should definitely work with them as much as you can. But it's rare that you can give sort of high level direction and then just let people go and it'll all turn out okay. So with a lot of engineers, you really want to make sure you define the specific criteria of what you're looking for, that they have a clear picture of what they need to do. And if you do that, you'll be very successful. But you do need to put in that management time and that extra time to make sure it's very understandable what they need to accomplish, as opposed to just some sort of broad or generic request.
Yeah, my experience with engineers is they deal less with the people stuff and more with the here's my project. And the more you give them, the more detailed it is. Usually, the happier they are.
Yep, absolutely. That's definitely the truth.
Yeah, I mean, did your military network help you with the company, or was it broadly outside of that?
Well, we've done business. We're a dual use technology company, so we've done business with the DoD and with civilian organizations. So I think my military background has been helpful. And there are folks that we've hired into the company that I've known from my time in the Air Force, the Air Force Academy. So one of my best friends from the Air Force Academy works with me in this company. So definitely military connections have been helpful for many different aspects of the company. Not necessarily fundraising. I don't think we've used military connections for that as much, but areas such as technical expertise or finding the right cyber people, we've definitely relied on military talent to get those things done.
So, Chuck had alluded to it. For somebody who wants to be an entrepreneur, what do you think their first step is now that they've imagined their product? What's their first step?
Well, there are a couple different types of companies. There are VC-backed companies, which is what we're doing. And if you're a technology company, you typically want to grow quickly and you want to grow very, very fast. So you want VC funding. You can think of it as sort of fuel to grow the business. Another way to do it is to do what's called a bootstrap company. And a bootstrap company is one where you don't have any external funding. You're just doing it all yourself or with your co-founders. And this can still be effective. The nice thing about a bootstrap company is you don't have to deal with raising money, which is a long process. You don't have to deal with the investor relations. After you have raised money, you can just focus on the company or the business itself. If you're going to bootstrap, I definitely would recommend you have some sort of side gig or something that you're doing as well, so that you have a little bit of money coming in and you're not just totally dealing with your own savings to make it happen. But that's a good way to start if you are in particular doing like a managed service company. Let's say you want to be an IT provider for your local geography or a cybersecurity provider for your local geography. This can be a very, very effective way to do it is through bootstrapping a company. Typically, bootstrap companies do have some sort of geographical advantage too. So you can think about like a restaurant is often a bootstrapped organization. And so it has an advantage that the customers and the competition all have to be within some geographical range. You're not competing with the whole world. Now, with a technology company that's really fast moving, let's say you're sort of on the cutting edge of technology, then you do typically want to be VC backed because that VC money can help you grow much more quickly. And the reason you want to grow much more quickly is you want to keep pace with the innovation, and you're also competing on a global scale. So you have to keep pace with innovation happening all over the place, not just your local geography. So if you're going for that sort of thing, I would recommend doing what I mentioned earlier, which is looking for angel groups and looking for angel investors, pitching them on the idea to get your initial round of funding.
I mean, you got so much going on between, the work, the podcast, running a company. How do you balance that with being a reservist? Because I mean, I'm a big fan of the Guard and Reserve. I know the value, but I also know that you're doing more than just a week and a month.
Yeah, it's definitely a challenging process balancing all these things. I think working with a company that is understanding of the requirements of a reservist is really important. So there are companies out there that regularly hire reservists that sort of understand the schedule you'll be on. Booz Allen is a good example of a larger company that will actually still pay you even while you're on your reservist time. At least that's what I've heard. I haven't experienced it myself. And when it comes to ValiCyber, I'm in a privileged position because I'm a co-founder. So I set a lot of the policy for the company. So by being a co-founder and a reservist, I'm able to make sure that the company has processes in place that are okay with me being away for a little bit of time for my reservist duty. That said, when I am working my reservist duty, I'm still working for the company in the evening. So you're kind of working very, very long days when you're trying to balance both of those things.
Yeah, and then making sure those two paths don't cross when you're at work in either place either, because the separation of church and state can sometimes be challenging, especially if you're doing that work on base. I mean, do you ever run into that? Yeah, I see what you guys are doing, but I know there's a better way.
So definitely have run into this issue. And I think my approach is really just to not talk about my company. People know I work for a company. So if they want to go learn about it and pursue it, it's not something I'm going to pitch them on or sell them on. I'm just going to focus on doing my job within the constraints of that job, not trying to sell my product into the government. And when you are working on government contracts that might overlap with an organization that you've worked with in the past, it's important to distance yourself from that work. And you can do that basically by not being the face of the work. So you can do behind the scenes work, you can do things behind the scenes, but you don't want to be the person that's interfacing with the government organization.
Yeah, that makes sense. So, I mean, with all the threats that keep evolving, where do you see the biggest need for, the talent like we have here in the next 5 years?
I think in the next 5 years, we're going to need a lot of talent in the AI space. I mean, this is very clear that AI is definitely going through a lot of development. Sorry, I'm recovering from COVID, so I got a bit of a cough. So I think when it comes to AI, I think understanding how LLMs work and also how to tune LLMs is going to be really important. I think security of the LLMs themselves is also going to be very important. So how do you secure the prompt of the large language model, and how do you prevent someone from poisoning the prompt of the large language model to do things that it's not supposed to do, or to reveal information that it's not supposed to reveal. I think those sorts of skills are going to be in high demand over the next 5 years.
Oh yeah, I mean, I've even tinkered with like ChatGPT and Grok, those things it wants to say, but it's not allowed to say by, entering the different prompts. That kind of gives you an idea of what's going on behind the scenes. I'm sure you've seen like you could say yes, no, or Apple as one of those examples. I mean, do you see that kind of stuff being cleared up pretty quickly to avoid the peek behind the curtain?
Yeah, I think that it's very difficult to secure prompts because it's natural language processing. I think ultimately people are going to rely on AI to secure the AI, because it's going to be natural language processing to make sure that these prompts are not malicious. And the other thing that you have to worry about when it comes to LLM security is ensuring that the LLM can't do something out of bounds. So let's say you're using an LLM to interface with customers at a car dealership. You don't want that LLM to then go and give them a ridiculous discount and sell a truck for $2 or something like that. So that's the other area where balance checking is going to be really important, to make sure that the LLM not only does it not receive bad input, but it doesn't give bad output or output that could put you in a sticky situation.
I think I know the exact example you're talking about, if that's what you're referring to. A guy managed to get a vehicle for next to nothing because here's the contract. And God bless him for figuring it out using his brain. I hope it worked out for him in the end. Did it? Do you know?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure if that story was just an example of what could be done. I think the example I'm familiar with is something similar, where someone was talking to like a chat bot and they got it to sell them a car for $2, but I don't think they actually went through with the purchase. But there might be another example where the attack was actually successful and someone was able to get something at a much lower price than they should have.
Yeah. Hey, my feelings with car dealers, I wouldn't cry. Uh, so, I mean, what unique advantages do you think that vets bring to the problem solving for cyber and national security challenges with our background knowledge?
Yeah, so I think veterans bring a lot of organizational experience, first working with the government. And that's important because a lot of civilian organizations don't know how to work with the government. And it's very hard to work with the government. It's a very slow process. So that's an area where veterans can be very effective, is helping civilian organizations understand government hierarchy, government structure, and how to deal with government contracting as well. So I've seen a lot of veterans be very successful in these sorts of roles. You have examples where there are companies that will essentially consult with other organizations to help companies get CIBR or STTR contracts. And those companies that are the consultants, they're typically made up of ex-military folks, and they know how to get these contracts because they've worked the other side of it. They've had experience awarding the contract. So that's definitely an area where veterans can be very successful, just helping companies interface with the federal government or even state and local government as well.
Yeah, knowing the ins and outs from the inside I mean, that's why general officers walk into jobs, because they know the ins and outs. And so do you see them playing a bigger role in protecting space and critical infrastructure in the future because of that background?
Oh, for sure. I think a lot of the space and critical infrastructure companies that are coming out these days are dual use. I mean, SpaceX is obviously dual use. A lot of the other space companies that are coming out are really focused on doing business with the government and having some sort of commercial story as well. And it's hard to do in space because it takes a long time to put something in orbit to actually get value from it. Typically, space companies struggle as venture-backed startups because VCs expect returns in a certain amount of time, and space technology companies aren't usually on that timeline. But the advantage I think that's happening today is a lot of VCs are starting to focus on dual-use technologies or venture-backed or essentially technologies that are focused on government usage. And so they're understanding that the timelines to receive any sort of return on their investment are going to be elongated by trying to do work with the government as opposed to trying to do work with the civilian sector.
Well, yeah, I mean, we saw that failure proposition with SpaceX. I mean, Musk is known for saying, "Hey, I was one failed rocket from this company going into the toilet," and I mean, look where they are now. Now it's ridiculous value they're providing. Yeah, it is what it is. So I'm glad for it. But I mean, what trends in AI, cyber, space tech excite you the most right now that you see a lot of opportunities in?
I think that when it comes to space tech and cyber, trends that are really exciting are going to be sort of minimal cybersecurity solutions that can actually operate on a satellite. So one of the big challenges for cybersecurity in space is that satellites are low size, weight, and power. So traditional solutions that work well on corporate IT networks are not going to work well on a satellite. So I think that's a really interesting area of security that's going to be very impactful for satellite communications. I think quantum computing is going to be very impactful too, particularly quantum encryption, quantum resistant encryption. Those are going to be areas that are really relevant to space because when you send something into space, it's going to be up there for a long time and you don't have the ability to change the hardware. So how do you make that satellite or that space system resilient against future threats using hardware that you know is going to be obsolete in just a few years? So those are definitely areas that are going through a lot of innovation and research right now. It'll be really cool to see what comes out of them.
So, I mean, any suggestions how, folks here can stay ahead of that curve?
Yeah, I think as someone who's been in the military, if you've worked with space or cyber technologies, certainly you have a good background to start with. And you can use that background to then get a job in one of these companies that is doing this dual use work in space technology. And once you're in the field, that it's all about continuous education, focusing on learning things more and more and more over time, and continually educating yourself as time goes on.
Good. So, I mean, if somebody wanted to stand out, like, boom, here's my resume. Here's what stands out to you if you get a resume from somebody that, because I mean, we all know the resume is a small part of it, but sometimes we're limited to that because that's all we can get in front of a hiring manager. So, is there anything there that jumps out and you says, yeah, I want to talk to this person?
Yeah, I think mentioning specific tools and technical tools is useful for me because then I know you've worked with something that I know takes a lot of skill to work with that I've worked with in the past. You don't want to be someone that lists like 100 different things. You just want to list a couple that you're really familiar with. But if someone mentions essentially the right lingo for the specific role that we're looking for, then that's an immediate indicator that they have good experience and that they have the knowledge that we could need to bring them onto the team. I think another thing that's really beneficial to have in a resume is a job history that doesn't have a lot of gaps. I think if you have a lot of gaps in your job history, that can be seen as a negative, especially if there's no explanation for those gaps. So if you had a gap because you're taking a gap year, I would recommend you say that up front in your resume. You don't hide it and just have this random gap in your resume. I think that's something that's also very, very beneficial for a hiring manager just to understand what you've been doing at different times in your career.
Yeah, I've even seen gaps listed, 10 months, a year, like, hey, health and wellness time off or something like that, just to address it. So there's not some mysterious, what, nobody else will hire you for a year? Because then it's kind of like when you're selling a house, you see the price keep coming down, somebody goes, what's wrong with it?
Yeah,
The same attitude will happen with a resume, like, what's wrong with this person that they couldn't find a job for 10 months or a year? We're like, hey, I just went traveling or I had, a baby or whatever it might be.
exactly.
Um, so I mean, kind of my last question, unless anybody else has any questions, is what would you, if you could go back to say 3 to 6 months before you got out and you could say something to yourself, you had the magic time machine, what would you have told yourself?
Hmm. I think I would have told myself to spend more time reading about startups because I sort of started this company and I didn't have experience starting a business because the government doesn't really train you for that. So I needed to find that education somewhere else. I ended up getting that education through sort of the school of hard knocks just by going through it. But I think having more of that education up front, more of that understanding up front would have been beneficial for the company as it got started in its early days. And so if you're transitioning out of the military into something that is unfamiliar, whether it's a startup or whether it's a new field, I definitely recommend taking some time to explicitly study and just learn about that field through some books or some resources that are well regarded in that space.
Yeah, and YouTube has a video for everything to get you pointed in one direction or another. So that's all I've got. So Austin, I want to thank you for coming out today. Do you have any closing thoughts you'd like to share with the group?
Yeah, I think
Oh,
last
Kenneth, hang on. Kenneth has one for you before you go, before you head out.
what you got, Kenneth?
Good morning. Good morning, Austin. Amazing brief today. Thank you for taking the time to come and talk to us. I was literally just going through ValiCyber's website today. I like to look at, what type of positions companies have or opportunities that we can kind of get involved in. And I noticed the way that you guys do your stuff is by just sending an email out and that type of stuff. So what type of open positions are you guys currently looking for within your organization?
Yeah, we have some open positions in sales that we're looking for. I don't think they've been posted yet, but we're going to start hiring the sales organization here soon. I also think we'll be hiring in support as well. So customer support, sort of IT support, and helping customers be successful with the product. Those sorts of roles are something that we're going to be looking for over the next few months.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, absolutely.
Hey, back to your closing thoughts. Sorry.
Yeah, no problem. No problem. Happy to answer any questions from folks.
Yeah.
So my closing thought is a quote from my graduate thesis advisor. He said, "Your success in life will be determined by your relationships with other people." And I think this was something that was very profound for me because, as I mentioned, he was my thesis advisor. I recognized him as sort of a very strong technical person, but he gave me this advice about business and about life that I think has been very beneficial for me as time goes on, because you could be a total expert in some technology, but if you can't communicate what you know and you can't communicate the value of what you know, it's not really going to have an impact. You have to be able to develop relations with people and work those relationships to get where you want to go. So I think definitely spending time on interpersonal skills and on building relationships with folks in your industry and really just treating people the way you want to be treated. I think those are really, really important things that will help you be successful as you go through your career and through life.
It's good stuff. So Austin Gadient, distinguished grad of the Air Force Academy, MIT scholar, reservist for the Air Force, ValiCyber CTO, probably half a dozen other titles that I'm not aware of. Thank you very much for coming out and spending some time with us today. Really appreciate you dropping some wisdom on the folks. Thank you, sir.
Happy to be here, and feel free to reach out if you have any more questions. Bye, folks.
Thank you. Hey, everybody else, we're going to head to lunch. We'll be back here at 2 o'clock for our next speaker. In the meantime, enjoy some chow, and I'll talk to you later.